So I'll be introducing our next presenter, Bud Veverka. For the past 8 years, Bud Veverka has been the director of land management for Mianus River Gorge, an independent nonprofit conservation and education organization in Bedford, New York, where he directs day-to-day land management efforts on the Mianus River Gorge Preserve, Taylor Preserve, and conservation easements throughout the Mianus River watershed. Bud is a member of the Lower Hudson Prism Steering Committee, as well as chair of the Lower Hudson Prism's Invasive Species Prevention Working Group and Biocontrol Forest Pest Working Group. Bud is also an adjunct professor at Western Connecticut State University, where he teaches a course on invasive species biology and management, and was recently elected president of the Northeast section of the Wildlife Society. Bud has a bachelor's degree in wildlife from Unity College in Maine, and a master's degree in biology from Eastern Kentucky University. Let us welcome Bud.
Hi, thanks a lot for having me in. I'm a pretty loud speaker, so I should Stevie speak back from this. Yep. So as you mentioned, I'm from Mianus River Gorge. A little background on our organization. Let's see if that moved. It did not. Not move. There it goes. All right. Okay, so we were founded in 1953. We were the first land project of the Nature Conservancy. Actually, the group of citizens who wanted to preserve this original 60 acres of old growth hemlock forest went to the Nature Conservancy, which is an advocacy group at the time, and we were like, could you help us buy this? And like, we don't buy land. Well, obviously that's what Nature Conservancy is very much known for now, is buying land, but this, at the time, they didn't purchase land. And so they helped them to purchase the first piece of property. In 1964, we became the first national natural landmark in the country. In 1993, the Nature Conservancy's values of spending more money on land in this part of the country where they could get a lot more land out west and in other parts of the world, they decided they didn't want to purchase any more land around the Mianus River Gorge. Our organization continued to want to do that, so we became an independent 501c3 in 1993. Since then, our organization itself has purchased another 400 acres on top of the 600 that is owned by the Nature Conservancy. Our mission is to preserve, protect, and promote an appreciation of natural heritage of the Mianus River watershed through land acquisition and conservation, scientific research, and public education through the region. We have a preserve. Our focus most time in our preserve is not the public aspect. We do a few walks and things like that. I've actually got a winter tree identification walk this Saturday, but we really focus on having students in to do research projects, having our own independent research, and really studying the landscape of the region and trying to analyze as much as we can. We do publish a good number of papers. It's a wonderful thing about our organization, one that drew me to that, to actually working there after being a state biologist elsewhere. And with what we do is, not only are we doing a lot of wildlife education or research, but we try to do a lot of research on invasive species too. And with that, I tend to always question best management practices. How can we better, fight invasives in almost a scientific way to that? So a lot of times we're setting up plots and doing experiments in that way. So some of the things, I'm going to talk a lot about the burning methods we're using, but some of the things we're doing at the preserve, large scale invasive surveys. This is one where we created these hexagonal tessellation in GIS with these plots. They have a 20-meter radius, so they're really small. But a great thing is we go out there and we actually measure all the invasive species within each one of those plots. So here is stiltgrass, and it shows your density and almost gives you a heat map, kind of where we need to focus on. The river portion of the preserve there, kind of along this, that is our old growth hemlock forest. And so that's kind of our invasive species prevention zone. Outside of that, we try to push those invasives back out of that area.
So the yellow orange that showed up the most of it. That's where most of the invasives are.
Yeah, well, let me see if the slide goes back here. It's angry with me. There it goes. Nope, it's too many. Yeah, so the red and orange is where we found red was intense, is our jurisdiction on that. Basically, the entire plot was nothing but still grass. And then orange is more about 50-50. And then below that is some plants and then few plants. And that's kind of those 4 categorizations. So we could send an intern out and they can really judge a plot pretty quickly. It's a few plants, some plants, a lot of plants, or intensive. And that's kind of how we round it up. We're not actually measuring individual plants out there, so the time to do these can be moved quickly. And you'll see one of our Leah there in one of our garlic mustard areas, kind of determining that is intense. And then these are more of our interns out here. They were doing water chestnut removal in the river. So we spent a lot of our time in the preserve doing removal from the water chestnuts to this is an area we were solarizing for knotweed. This is the invasive strike force, which Cassidy was a part of. In there treating viburnum shrubs. Just some of our interns literally ripping things out of the ground to a lot of our different volunteer days and things like that. So we're always working on something. I do manage 50 different invasive plants within the preserve. We actively manage that number. I have about 10 others that I could whatever with. I'm not really actively managing them. And every year I add about 10 to my active management list. So it's getting a little intense. But another nice thing we're doing also is besides that, we're also doing a lot of pest control. And so we are treating about every 3 years, we're about 1,000 trees a year for hemlock woolly adelgid with a basal bark treatment here on our 300 to 400-year-old hemlock trees. We are introducing this here's your mile-a-minute weevil. And then our sampling, we do some slingshot sampling to look for adelgid. We also I've moved off the slingshot. Now we're doing shotgun sampling, which is always fun. Take the gun out in the woods and shoot at trees. And I'll tell the neighbors, hey, we're going to be, and usually they call the police and the police are, it's just Mianus doing something else. Don't worry about it. And then we've been working with Cornell. Actually, you've got Sophia, one of our students up there. She's working on our invasive jumping earthworms. So the Asian jumping worms. She's actually doing some eDNA sampling there to determine which species we have and what locations. So sampling both the worms and their castings and get to see about the eDNA from the castings. And then we've been working with Cornell, and you'll see some of these ones of our introduction of both like Laricobius beetle for hemlock woolly adelgid and the Leucotraxis silverfly for the introductions there. And we've been doing, we now have 4 different species of biocontrol insect on the preserve for hemlock woolly adelgid. Hemlocks are important to us. It's the reason we exist. It was the reason that we became a national natural landmark. And so we try as much effort to preserve our hemlocks. So with all the other efforts we're doing, then we are doing restoration efforts. This is a site here we restored. That was pretty much nothing but mile-a-minute and autumn olive. It looks like that now. A lot of effort, spraying, treating, taking it down the dirt, seeding it. We hand seeded the whole thing in native grass, and put a lot of effort into that field. This is 2 other ones we worked on. This is another site we did. This was entirely, this was 25 feet of multiflora rose. And then once we pulled all the multiflora rose, we found a giant patch of knotweed in the center of it we didn't know existed. So about 5 years after that, that's what it looks like. It took about 5 years to get that project going. And now I'm starting to get mugwort moving into it. So I'm going to go back in and treat it again. And then our project we're currently working on, which is the fields next to my house. We got a 3.5 acres. We are clearing of intense vegetation, including a lot of dead trees. We clear out to actually open those back up as meadows. And one is going to be a little more of a wet meadow, and the other will be a dry meadow, both with native grass as their primary. So those are the things we do besides some of the other techniques we're going to talk about, and that is burning today, where I'm primarily here. I have a background in Kentucky where I got to do lots of big burns, 300, 400 acre burns where we would, set the ground on fire and just watch it roll over, 10, 12 foot big blue stem. And it would hit these red cedars and just right up the red cedars, kill those. These are 20-foot red cedars it's killing. Just amazing burns that we would, do over there. And then I came this part of the country and we can't use fire. And so how can I use fire? Because fire is a helpful method, particularly for plants from Japan, which are not fire adapted at all. And if we could just set a fire through the woods, we can kill a lot of these things. So can't do that. So I started researching the weed torches. I knew from my time in the Midwest that Ohio had done a number of projects with weed torches. And so I started looking up their stuff. I decided to buy one myself, started experimenting on our stiltgrass. It had worked in Ohio. I figured it's going to work. And within 2 seasons, we had patches of stiltgrass that were completely gone, covered in natives. And so I bought another one, and then I bought another one, and I bought another one. So now I have 4 tanks, or 4 actual torches. We have 8 tanks, so we can always have a spare for each one. And we do a lot of burning now. And you'll see here, we have our stiltgrass work, which is the great thing here is we'll do trails and that, but I can literally drop people right in the river and they can torch, those little tufts that are growing up off the rocks where you couldn't do that with an herbicide in the river like that. It's great if I were to pull, if we were to cut that or pull that again, if you're on top of that and you're trying to cut it, it doesn't work real well. If you're trying to pull it, you're just going to pull all the moss off the rocks too. So the burning is a wonderful tool to use. You'll see here as well, not only are we doing that, we're also doing some work on barberry. And so in the top part is actually a company we use and we kind of introduced them to it. Now they're actually selling it to other people, is they are burning for us a whole bunch of the barberry. The great thing is we do it in the middle of winter. And so it makes for, especially when snow is on, it's really easy to go hit each individual barberry. As the snow melts, you hit the shrub. So then you have identified each shrub. By the time, and then when spring rolls around, we're getting on those about 60 to 70% kill, which is actually pretty similar to a lot of the herbicides. Another method to do is also go in and cut beforehand. You probably know this method too. Cut the barberry, let it resprout, and then a lot of people herbicide the resprouts. We're doing the same thing with fire. We're cutting it, let it resprout, and then hit it with the fire. And that same kind of methodology works. And then we're getting almost 100% after a cut and spray, or cut and burn. We're getting almost 100% kill. So methods are great. You'll see here, this is Emily. This is one of our volunteers out there. You'll see a little bit of smoke from the leaves. This was really recently. She was doing some. Leaves are fairly dry. We'll get a little smoke. It doesn't go anywhere. It's amazing how little burn you actually get when you're doing this.
Is that propane or butane?
Propane. So I'll go into a little bit details about the system. But these are some of the articles you'll find. You all should have the one from Connecticut. Is a good little review. It's one of the better reviews I have out there of using the torches, methods. It goes into what you should be wearing, precautions to take. Some of it's a little overkill. We'll talk about that when we get out in the field. But it's a lot of it is common sense when you're doing this methodology. At the preserve, when it's great weather, we're herbiciding, we're pulling invasives. When it's raining and you can't herbicide, we're burning. And so when it's out there, we got a nice light mist coming down, we're always out doing stiltgrass in the summer. If we get a nice July rain, or some of those kind of misty days, especially in August, and you start to get the really heavy dew in the mornings, those first 2 hours every morning, we're burning stiltgrass. Because you got that moisture out there. Once we start to see it start to dry out, sun gets really warm, we stop burning, we pick up the other equipment, and we start doing other stuff. So we time it so that so we're not having to take a bunch of water in the field with us. We're basing it on the moisture out there. If it's raining, we're burning. If it's raining heavy, we're in the office because we're not out there in the heavy rain. It's actually ineffective in heavy rain. You'll start to hit the plants. We have burned in like pouring rain, and it didn't do anything to those plants at all. So you want to have a light rain. And then of course, when winter comes, the snow's on the ground, we are heading right out to do barberry. That is the best time. And it works great for most multi-stemmed invasives. So if you have a multi-stem woody, it works really well for them. And we'll talk a little bit more on how specifically it works for those.
English ivy?
So a lot of the vines I haven't experimented with, and I'm not finding a lot of information on them. So it's one of those ones that we need to do some work on. We were just out and we were talking about what, the Japanese honeysuckle, how effective could it be for some of these? It works for mile a minute. It didn't, but it's an annual. So the perennials sometimes be a little tougher. I mean, you can go in and you can start hitting the mile a minute and we wilt it down and it won't go to seed. But how it works on some of these more woody vines, I don't know. It has shown to be ineffective for Oriental bittersweet. So you can interpret that how you want, but it's also one of these ones, hey, get a torch, go out, experiment, and then tell everybody. Whether it worked or not. You can don't feel bad when an experiment doesn't work and just say, hey, it didn't work. We've been doing Pachysandra. We saw some effect, but not enough. So we stopped that. We were, for the effort, we weren't seeing the response. For garlic mustard, it works really well. For first year garlic mustard, you'll find a number of articles online and people doing garlic mustard. And so you can do that in combination with pools. So you can hit it this time of year is when we're doing our garlic mustard. We'll do it all winter long because the garlic mustard is green. We'll go out there and we'll hit the garlic mustard, wilt that back. And then in spring, those sites that would be heavily garlic mustard coming up because we're now hitting those first year plants. Now they're coming up and we have about half of what we had before. So now we can go in and do a pool and it's not as that much intense. And so just here's the study we actually did. We established for stiltgrass, we did these site plots. These were 1 meter plots. We did a number of treatments and we measured a number of things in each plot, which was the stiltgrass height, percent stiltgrass, native, percent cover, and then treatment month. And then we controlled, we pulled, we cut. We did 3 different burn times, a 5-second burn, a 10-second burn, and it says 15-second burn, but we literally just turned it to ash was our second burn. So it was however long it took us to turn it to ash. And then we did the herbicides there are the vinegar. So the chemical herbicides, that's actually I think it was a 10% vinegar and a 20% vinegar, or a 10 and 20% vinegar mix was also used. And then we kind of analyzed the whole thing in September. And then actually went this next year and actually looked at the same plots after 1 year treatment. And we actually saw residual effect from 1 year later. So just looking at cost per acre of treatment. Now this cost is by the amount of time. So each time we got to 1 meter plot, we said go, and we had a stopwatch. And we timed how long it took to pull that 1 meter area. And then with that, we calculated that at $15 an hour. And then we extrapolated that to an acre. And so the cost for pulling is about $2,500 per acre for labor. Cutting is much less. You'll see the 5-second, 10-second burns there. The full burn, obviously, because the time-wise, it took a lot more time. Plus, with these, we also cost in fuel, propane, and those type of costs as well. And you'll see over there the kind of post-treatment cut and what was best. Obviously, the control was none. But you'll see there what the best percentages came out after it was all done. So in September, when we went back to look and said what was best, we saw that pulling, we still had about 10% back on our best month. And when we did it in June, we almost had about 80% come back from pulling. So it was amazing. We pulled the entire plot and then the entire thing resprout. All those, we just disturbed that soil and all those seeds came up. To where we see the 10 and full, the 10-second burn, the full burn, and the 20% acid or vinegar acid it kind of really knocked everything out. When we look at those on our treatments here for each of the groups, you'll see that obviously the percent of stiltgrass went down per thing. So here's pulling, and this was actually September when we went back to look. So when we pulled the entire plot in June, when we looked at it in September after we pulled it in June, 70% of the plot was covered in stiltgrass again. In July, it was about 25%, and even in August, about 10%. So we saw that much in August still there in September. And you'll see for cutting, it was very similar. Just from June, we saw 50% resprout from on that site, from cutting that site. And then July and August, you'll see there. If we started looking at the burn treatments, you'll see the full burn when we cooked everything in June, July, and August. I mean, it was gone. And looking back in September, there was nothing there. The issue with cooking the whole site was we also cooked all the natives that were on the site. And by cooking it, you're spending a lot more time on the site and you're wasting a lot more fuel. In the 5-second burn, you'll see what we had residual left. But if you look at July for the 10-second burn, we took out almost we eliminated the stiltgrass on that plot pretty much. With a 10-second burn, it just didn't come back. And so then we could start to look at the actual overall cost. And so the yellow is kind of the best in each of these categories. And so you'll see cutting for materials, cutting is pretty cheap, gas is pretty cheap. Obviously 170 is a little more expensive. Propane is more expensive than buying a gallon of gas. You're buying a tank of propane. But when you look at the amount of time you save on going across the site pretty quickly with this propane tank, and when we go out to do the demo, I'll show you how quickly you can move through an area. Because if you guys have ever done weed eating out there and you're trying to hit the invasive without taking out the native, you're kind of swirling around it, and you're trying not to knock out that little maple tree by going around it. When I take the torch out there, I just go through. I'll wilt that maple tree a little bit, it'll come right back. But I've killed that stiltgrass. So the great thing here is it knocks that species out in a much quicker time frame than anything else. And so that reduces your labor costs. And so that's why overall your cost is lowest for your burn. And then as we look at everything else across there, that 10-second burn was the best in the entire category. We saw the native plants were still there. We saw that we had very little stiltgrass remaining. We saw the stiltgrass proportion to native plants was really good. So, by knocking that stiltgrass out, but still retaining some native plants on the site, our proportion was extremely good for those sites. And that's what you want, because a lot of this time you're dealing with these invasives that are mixed into other plants that you want to keep. And so that was always when we were out there with a weed eater, like, okay, I'm taking out these natives at the same time. You're trying to avoid them, but you're going to hit some. And then when you're herbiciding, it's the same issue. You get so much, especially if you're doing any kind of foliar, you're going to have an effect on those other plants around it. So we have found that this method is actually the best, particularly for this species here. So we don't do any stiltgrass work other than burning. We don't cut it. We do all of our stiltgrass work is burning. So questions on the presentation, but I want to go through a little bit more of like methodology, what we do out there in the field, and we're going to take a walk and we're going to go and actually do this in the field. But I'll take any questions from anybody you have. And then after some questions, I'll talk more about methodology as we go out and we actually put the pack on and move out there.
So I know you do your own research and you mentioned these different research papers are targeted for different species and the effects, but is there like a one-page like cheat sheet of what species, what responds best or what burning might actually promote?
That is in the works. So I'm trying to get, I was at the Saratoga Expo as well. I was trying to get people when I do my demo there is like, get a torch. If there's something we don't have at the our preserve and you want to burn it, but do it in an experimental way so that we can then figure out and we can make a list within this region of what effectively works. Another resource you can look at is US Forest Service has their fire, basically fire papers. I think it's FIES, Forest Service. And it's basically, it tells what the fire regime is, and then also like what fire studies have been done per species. So you can write the species in and see if anybody's done any work on this. And so if you do stiltgrass, the one paper you get is the Ohio paper. And so there needs to be, we need to add some more papers to that. This was a high school student who did this research. But we are working on trying to put together at least a reasonable paper from it. We'd like to adapt a couple other studies into it, so it's not just stiltgrass. But we're going to be adding a barberry to that, which was also in the Ohio study. But we also would love to have, the garlic mustard added, any other species that we can start to work on. One we were just looking at was there's this Japanese spirea. And I was just looking at the species at our last PRISM meeting. I'm like, I think we could kill that with fire. And I just don't have any at the preserve. So it's one of those ones, like if somebody has some, let's set up some plots. Let's do some control versus, some burning. And you don't even have to do the other regimes. You could literally just do control and burn and then see what the result is. Yes. So autumn olive, we have not done autumn olive. I don't have a lot of autumn olive, and where I did, I pretty much took a bulldozer in there. So that was our only site of autumn olive, and I just bulldozed the whole thing. If it's multi-stemmed and it's young, it has a potential. If it's more mature, at that point, the root system's too strong, and you'd just be sitting there wasting your fuel. Now, what a method is potentially, if you guys have done cut stump, there is a potential, and there is some literature out there where people have experimented in cutting the trees, and then when they resprout, then torching that root crown area at that point, almost like secondarily treating that resprout, similar to what I was mentioning with some of the other plants that were resprout. It has potential, but again, that's another one that I think needs more experimentation to see if it's effective. It's most effective on herbaceous plants. Annual herbaceous plants is the most effective, and then perennials some. We have seen in some literature that it's not effective for mugwort, which I'm always looking for another method for mugwort. But we have also not seen it. We've seen that it's effective for multi-stemmed shrubs. So it really works well on barberry. I think it would work well on the spirea. And then if you think of we have tried a little bit on, there's been mixed results on multiflora rose. I mean, I hit a multiflora rose 2 years in a row, and that thing is no, I'm good. But other sites they've done it, and they said they killed multiflora with it. So it's one, there more experimentation needs done with it. A lot of the fire papers you're going to find are fires that they're doing prescribed fire burns. And what happens with prescribed fire is the burn will go across the landscape, but typically it's not intense enough to kill some of these species to the root. And so, especially in our region, we don't have those prairies that get nice and hot and kill those invasive species. We have more mixed woody, areas. Our fields tend to be a little greener through the spring. We don't get the intensity of burn that you get out west. And so we potentially, even when some of the papers that say, well, we did prescribe fire, it was not effective. If you're targeting individual plants, it may be more effective. And that's where we need to step in and do more experimentation. Yes.
But a 20-pound propane tank full, what's that, 44?
So these are a 10-pound that we wear. It lasts about an hour.
Okay.
So, and then what happens with it, you'll see they'll actually, as you're pushing this out, it starts to freeze up on the tank. And people have used a couple different methods. Some have used like a blanket that you put around like a furnace, furnace blankets around them to kind of insulate it. But what we like to do is take a big bin of water out there. And as that freezes up and you start to lose your power, we switch out, we throw that in the water tank, and that warms that tank back, that tank back up quicker, and we throw another one on. And then we'll just burn until that starts to slow down, and we'll drop that and we'll pick the other one back up. So we just constantly are switching in and out. And it only takes about 10 minutes to switch a tank, or probably less than that, 5 minutes to switch a tank if you're good at it. But you're switching in and out of the tanks, but you can get a full, an hour out of that tank of what's in there. And if you think an hour burning, and I'll show you how quickly we burn an area, you can move across a large area of land. And then when we add 4 torches, we can burn some really good areas. Yes.
Can you talk again about, we talked on the phone about the autumn olive and using the dabbing if the burning doesn't work?
Yeah, so other methods, if you're familiar with cut stump, where you would dab the stem. I have in the truck with me, if you're unfamiliar with it, Nasma, they make a little buckthorn blaster. We use a lot of them. Pretty much all the neighbors in our area have come to my talks and are all using them. I've actually been going to like people's houses and teach them how to use the torch too. I went to Chevy Chase's house and taught them how to use the weed torch. And so, the little thing, the nice with that is you put your herbicide in, it's got a sponge on the end. There's nothing external. You dab the top of the stem and you get no runoff whatsoever. So it's really nice to use. That's why I don't like using it on barberry, because it's so many tiny little stems, but our single stem ones like autumn olive that may only have like 3 stems coming up, or buckthorn, or for us, Oriental Photinia, sapphire berry, all of these ones, and all of our invasive viburnums, we do all of this. We cut it, use that little dabber, and it's very effective. Yes.
I came here to see you because I'm exhausted from trying to get rid of the invasives on my property. And my girlfriend, when she was around 65, organic farmer, set herself on fire when she sold her sheep, and she wanted to clear the meadow after the sheep were gone and they weren't grazing. So she went out there with a torch and set herself on fire.
Yeah, and when we get out there and we do the demo, we'll go over safety and talk about what you want to do in the field. And it's really important to have a lot of sense. And you'll see it in there. Equipment, I think there's a whole little acronym in the guide you have. Yourself, equipment, and I think yes or something like that. And it really tells you've got to be aware of your surroundings. You got to be aware of the species you're working on, similar to what the gentleman earlier was talking about. Know your species, because it could be completely ineffective if you're treating something and you don't know the species well. So we need to research and know these species. That's why I do a literature search before I even start experimenting. And then when we experiment, instead of going out and me treating 50 acres, I'll go set up and do a plot for 2 seasons first to make sure this is going to be effective. And then I go to really heavy treatment, because we need to learn before we do. And so with the method, what we're trying to do is we want to do this in an efficient method, in a safe method, same as what we do with herbicide, the same thing. For us at the preserve, we do extremely low amount of foliar spray. Almost everything we do is either dab, hack and squirt, all these methods that are going to be something that you're going to very little herbicide on the landscape. We do the basal bark treatments for our hemlocks too. And so we're not doing any kind of overhead foliar. We're doing very little of that at all. And when we do, actually, we get Trillium comes out. They'll sometimes come in. Even when we do our Phragmites plots, we end up having them do glove of death. So if you're not familiar with glove of death, you put a rubber glove on, then you put a cotton glove on, then you spray the cotton glove, and then you grab the plant and you pull up on the plant. And you put the herbicide on the underside of the leaves of the Phragmites. It works great. And so, but that's very time consuming in sites, but if you can get in there and do that, it may take you more time, but the landowners and the neighbors are much more apt to do something like that than pulling a pump spray out and start foliar spraying everything. So we try to, as much as we can, target and know exactly what we want to do treatment wise on each plant. And that's why the fire has become important for us, because we have been treating barberry on their slopes coming down to the river bottom with herbicide, and then on the river bottom we're doing the fire. So anywhere we're close to that water, we're doing fire on those.
What does the permitting look like for using the fire?
Using the weed torches?
Yeah.
There is nothing written in our town code on it, so we're using them. So they have no way to, they're like, we have no regulation. There's no open fire allowed. Well, it's not an open fire. So you can't set a fire, but this is not setting a fire. So they were like, we don't, so you're gonna need to check your local one. But most towns are gonna say, I don't know. Because it's not a method, you're not setting a fire. You're using fire to burn something, but you're not setting a fire. And when we get out there, I'll show you the whole thing. And it's really about being cautious and doing the proper way on this. And like I said, we do most of ours when it's raining and then when snow on the ground. But you can do this on plenty of dry days if you come in and pre-wet the site as well. So, but if you're gonna do any kind of large acreage, I say do it when it's raining. Or when you had a nice good storm, like we'll do barberry when it's not snow on. But if we've had a good rain for a couple days and everything's really soaked, especially those leaves are all soaked, it's a perfect time to go out there and kill some barberry.
Wind, any regulations with wind or anything?
Of wind?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So if anybody's ever done prescribed fire, you can't do more than 8 miles an hour wind at all. And then underneath that, you're supposed to regulate how for a prescribed fire, you actually go into the wind. So you want the wind blowing in your face, you set the fire on this side, and when you want the fire moving into the wind. For us, when you're out there torching, the best thing is actually have the wind going away from you, but you want it to be a very light wind. That's what I like when it's raining because there's almost no wind when it rains. So you want it because you don't want that smoke coming straight back in you. And also if the wind's coming at you, it'll blow your torch out a lot too. So if you get any wind, your torch gets blown out. This is like the fire is not so volatile that it's going constantly. I mean, a good stiff breeze will come through and I'll knock my torch out. Or if I get down into the vegetation too much and it's too wet and I'm down in the vegetation, that moisture will come up and knock my torch out as well. So you got to have the space away from about 6 to 10 inches from the torch head is the most effective flame of this torch. And so that's what you want to use when you're torching is that distance out there. But the nice thing is I'll take and I'll reach up and I can stretch out with one hand and it's up on a slope, on stone walls, and amongst the stones, I can hear all those little stiltgrass up a lot like that, which you couldn't do with a weed eater or anything else. That's how you can hit those. So the nice thing is getting these little individual stiltgrass mixed in with other stuff. And we do it a lot in our ferns too. And all of our ferns are still there and the stiltgrass is gone.
How long of a burn do you use for barberry?
So barberry is about 20 seconds, 20 to 30, depending on the size of the barberry. A smaller barberry is going to take a little bit less time. And then it's really important that you rotate on that barberry.
Mhm.
So you're going to want to do one side and then move yourself to the other side. Because we've seen a lot is if you stick to one side, that barberry is going to come back in the spring and this half's going to be green and this half's going to be dead. So you need to go and kind of cover both sides of that. You can get the flame going around it, but it doesn't quite hit that back side. So I typically do two sides. Some people will try to rotate the entire way around. I think when you're moving, I don't like to like be this way and moving this way with my torch. I want to go one side, do it, turn my flame down, come around this side. So that I'm on both sides and I know my steps and everything like that. When I'm going through stiltgrass, I'm careful, especially when it's high. You don't know where there's a log. You always want to be careful moving through an area. So I'm pretty much going ahead of me. Now, if I have to step into the stiltgrass, if we do those roads and we just pretty much stand on the roadway, we work the sides beside it. If I'm in a patch, especially a dense patch, we'll go a little bit. I'll bring my flame down. I'll step and make sure I'm with the log and then I'll check in. I'll step into the spot I just burned and then I'll keep working. So I'm always bolting it down and stepping in. I'm usually not working through spots that are unburned because there's just too much apt for tripping over something. How I set this up, and you'll see in the field, is if I fall down, my hand goes off the thing, it shuts off. There's no propane coming out. So there's no, some people will set it so that their little torch never goes out. There's a little where you can actually turn it on and the flame stays on. I go through sparking flints all the time because I rather turn it off and then turn it back on with the flint. And so that's what I'll do. So how are we on time for heading out?
I think we're good.
Any last question? A lot of what we'll talk about in the field is like method. Yeah.
You mentioned.
And then we just go. And gloves, leather shoes, You don't want, you want some kind of duct type material, nothing synthetic that could melt or something like that. They always say heavy leather gloves. Any leather glove works because you're not putting your hand in front of this stuff. You just aren't. You always want somebody to watch your back. So I'll have somebody who they'll have a shovel and a water tank, just in case. What we had was we've rarely caught like vegetation on fire, but every now and then you get close enough to a log, and that's dry underneath, and we'll catch that, and it's almost like charcoal. It catches really easy, and we've had to dig it out before and like put that out. And so you have to watch that, especially if you're having interns run these. So we teach our interns every year, and they do most of the burning for us as the interns. So it's a fairly simple thing to run, but we're always there to back up. So each intern, they run in pairs to do this. So one is always on a torch, the other is always on backup.
And how much does this go for?
About 275 to 300. All of this, when you buy the set, has the little stuff to put it all together. You want to use a little bottle of like soapy water. Every time you use it, bring it back out. You want to check all your joints, make sure you're not leaking propane anywhere. So we just kind of spray down all the joints. We set it all up last night. And you just check and make sure everything is set. You're going to turn the propane on. And then once you turn the propane on, I usually put it on my back and I'm setting the field. I won't turn it back off again until I drop it back in the truck. The handle, some of the handles, when you get the handle on, it'll come without this little set here with the handle, and just be the tube coming back to the handle. And the problem with that is it just basically, once you turn it on there, propane's coming out. So you want to make sure that if you purchase it, it comes with this little regulator. On the side here, you'll see where this has that little dial, and you can hear it. You put it on a little bit and you get a little bit of propane coming out. And people like that because basically it's like a pilot light. I tend to keep it off, and if you turn it all the way off, it's still, if you push the handle, your propane will come out. So if I take my hand off, it is going to go out. That way I don't have to worry about, like, if you've ever done anybody has done electrofishing, it's the same thing. The minute you pull your hand off the thing, it cuts it off. It's when you have to put your hand down on it for the electrofishing to work. Here is the garlic mustard. This would be our first year plant. It's gonna come back. This in the second year, you're gonna have a flower, and this is typically, if you guys do any kind of in the field garlic mustard pulls, you're pulling that second year plant. At that point, that plant dies, but all the seeds get spread. So how can we target before we get to that point where you've got this limited time frame before it gets middle of June and they all start to go to seed, is can we target that first year plant? It's really hard if you want to go through the woods and start pulling all of these, but you can torch them. So you're going to give yourself a little bit of propane, and we've got perfect weather right now. We've got rain coming down. This is the day I would say, Jean-Luc, who's my assistant, go grab the torches. Let's go out and do some.
You gotta get a trigger on that handle instead of doing it that way.
What's that?
Gotta get a trigger on the handle instead of doing it that way.
Yeah. These torches, you can buy these at any hardware store. You can buy the little replacement flints. That one's worn out, so I have to get a different flint here. Try and keep it going since my torch is not working well. But you're just wilting that plant down, and you don't have to do the full intense. If you're one, a lot of times if I have a few plants in an area, I just go in there really light with my fire, and I set it near each one. And you'll see we got something on fire, but you can see how quickly it does go out. It doesn't take long for it to burn itself out. And so you rarely get any kind of sprawling burn going in this time of year. Now, March, and you've got a lot of plant material on the ground, grasses, still grass, you can get it going a little bit. So you have to be cautious of when you're doing it. Right now we've got great wind. We almost have no wind going. But if I'm doing it, I still can feel the wind on the back of my ear, so I always want to do it into the wind so the smoke's blowing away from me. If you are sensitive to smoke, you definitely want to wear probably goggles over just glasses, so that it doesn't get in your eye. But that's really about it. Some people also sometimes like to wear a mask, especially if you're getting into pretty dense stilk grass and get a lot of smoke coming up in that stilk grass when it's moist. You know, you can suck some of that in. So wearing a mask occasionally. The other main reason I wear the gloves is just for sparking, because most of the time your hands aren't anywhere near the flame. When you run it for a while, this will get hot. So you always want to take caution where you're putting this down. So what I usually try to do is I'll find a bare spot of soil, and that's where I'll set it down if I need to do something. So I'm not setting anything on fire on the ground. Because a lot of times that was I'll see my interns will make a mistake. They'll take a hot torch, throw it right in the back of the truck, and start melting my bed. So I always have to tell them, keep the end off the end until it cools. It doesn't take long for it to cool down. About 10 minutes and I can throw it right in the truck. Alright, all I'm doing is hitting the vegetation, so I'm not going down to the ground, because that's where all the leaf litter is. I'm coming across the top of the plant. And you see how it wilts down? You see how those leaves kind of wilted? Now, the burn time on garlic mustard is a little longer than stilk grass. Stilk grass wilts a little faster. Garlic mustard takes a little bit more time on each of those leaves, depending on how intense I'm burning. If I'm in a bigger stand here and I don't have all this mixed in here, if you're doing a lot of burning with it intense, you want to use the ears, because it does get pretty loud. For a half an hour, it can actually have an effect on your ears. It likes the mugwort this time of year. But you see, I'm not burning this up. The ash we're getting is a little bit of leaf litter. I'm not turning these plants to ash. I'm wilting them. And that's the key, is what we see when we burn some of these off, it doesn't kill the root. It pushes all their energy back in the root. But when we wilt them, we break those cell walls, especially if they've got some moisture on, they've been moisture off. There's more moisture. We're boiling that water in those, in those cells. So you're doing the same thing when you steam broccoli, is you're breaking those cells up to make it softer. And you're breaking up those cells in that plant. It actually puts more energy back into the plant, and that's what kills it, trying to restore itself. So the idea is you want to break down the plant without the plant pushing all its reserves back into its roots. And so that's why it's really just a wilting method, and it's not a burning method. So we're usually not wanting to catch anything on fire. And I'll be hitting individual stiltgrass plants in amongst the ferns.
Okay.
And I'll just weave this underneath fern branches and stuff like that around them. You're gonna get some wilt from those ferns, but they'll spring back. When we burn the sites, and I don't know what it is, we see a quicker response than when we go into a cut a site. We cut a site for 3 seasons, we still get stiltgrass, we don't have as many natives come back. Obviously we cut some of those natives. We burn, and we get natives jumping into that site very quickly. And so we don't know if partly it's the ash, partly it's that plant decay that causes other plants to come back, or if those natives just like that heat now that's hit that ground, it's caused it. But it's one of those things where we see a better response, even with similar treatment methods to fire. And it's the reason we do prescribe fires, because natives in North America respond to fire. They like it. The hardest part is finding a rain jacket that is synthetic, is not synthetic. So I always recommend just go ahead and let your Carhartt get a little wet when you're doing it, but this is the best material to be wearing. So you always want to think about the just in case. That's why you always want to know your surroundings. That's why we try to do it in the rain. We could go out probably most days and do this and not make a fire, but that's a probably. So, and then in the winter, I said when the snow is on, it's awesome. I mean, it's so much fun to melt snow. So we'll do this one more time. I'm gonna just demo here on one of these woodies to kind of show you what we would do. And just kind of come around it. Yeah, we'll need that one more time. You're gonna get burned. But I only did that for about 5 seconds. You're gonna do that for 20 seconds. And that's why it's so important on these areas to have your water, you know, around that kind of thing. So this is where you're gonna wanna have, when you're doing any kind of shrub burning, you're gonna be more prepared for those sites. Because the shrub burning, you're going to be on an intense site. You're going to be burning at the base, where all the leaves are at, and you're going to be doing it for 20 seconds, which is a long burn. So even if it's as wet as it can be, that leaf layer is going to catch a fire. Now, it's probably not going to go very far. But if you don't want a bunch of smoke, especially if you have neighbors, things like that, then you try to keep it to the minimum. So the key is you can't be afraid of fire. You can't panic at any time like that. This here is going to burn here. By the time we got up here, it'd probably be out. So even if it starts to get away from you, it's going to run out of fuel, or significant fuel. And if you're in this kind of weather, eventually it's not gonna go very far. That's why I said herbaceous is great. You're wilting it, you start to go to shrubs, we love snow. Because if we threw all snow around all this, I'm still gonna start a fire right at that center in the base, but now it's not creeping anywhere, because it's completely surrounded and covered in snow. Or if we had this rain for another hour like this, or 2, and everything is really nice and soaked, another great time to come out and start doing shrubs. You want it really well soaked before you start doing it. And here's where we always have our backup person who would have a shovel, and then they're gonna have their pump sprayer, if you need to. This is a different kind of tool than a flamethrower, so you do want to, say that to people, because we're not throwing the flame anywhere. The point it's called a flamethrower because it throws the flame onto something. This here is we are torching. So you use a torch like you would use any kind of small butane torch, but we're targeting a site. These are really common. For years, people had these and used them in their driveways, on asphalt, along curb edges. People would walk through town on the curb edges, and this is how they kill all the herbicide, or kill all the little weeds without doing the little Roundup sprayers. They used to use these, but everybody became afraid of fire. So obviously, if you're not doing it on your own property, you've got to get permission from the property owner, and you may want to just check the local fire code.
Fill in the tank. Like, is it just the same as barbecue tanks?
Yep, we take ours to BJ's. They're the cheapest. But a lot of, find your local gas station if there's something more local to you that, fills them. A lot of places don't fill anymore. These are 10-gallon tanks, so it's easy to find them. Sometimes they're listed as 11-gallon. But we just buy the extra tanks off of Amazon too. I think they're about $45. So I like to have 3 if I'm running. I need to actually get more. 3 is the perfect amount because you have 1 in the water, 1 on your pack, and 1 waiting. And so that second one, by the time your third one, your other one's done in the water, you can pull it back out, you've got the third one on, you can kind of rotate those 3 tanks through. And 3 tanks will get you 3 hours of burning, which is most of the time, by the time you get out there, set up, you burn until lunchtime, you're done, and then you can do the afternoon if you wanted to. But most of the time we're burning in the morning because the moisture's too low in the afternoons. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.